All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're coming from. I'm Brian. That's Desiree. She's filling in for me as Melissa is on a plane, and the other Brian had an emergency meeting come up. So my lovely wife Desiree decided to fill in. Not because she's just my lovely wife, because she does know a thing or two about Revit as well. Well, all the feedback sessions. There was one of the feedback sessions I got. It was like, "Yeah, no, your wife's right on that topic. You're clueless." So there is always that. But I do see a lot of new names. So for those of you who are joining us, thank you. This is Revit Radio. This is a session where we only talk, we only answer questions you ask. So if you are going to ask a question, please fill out that in the question and answer pod. And if you are going to just chat, give me crap like Michael already is doing, feel free to then fill those out in the webinar chat. It's a little bit difficult for us to keep track of the webinar chat, but for questions, but it is much easier to keep track of those, and you probably won't lose it if you put it into the Q&A pod. So with that said, yeah, everybody loves giving me crap, and it's well deserved because I dish it out so much. So with that said, Desiree, do you have anything you want to start talking about, being that you've newly been playing back into Revit 24 in the last couple weeks?
Oh my god, the interface. It reminds me of, I think did I go to Revit in like 2010 or 2009, something like that. And there was that button that was like find my command because you couldn't find anything because weren't used to the ribbon. Now everything's in the same spot, but the pictures are so different. I feel lost.
Yeah, I'm always sitting there going, okay, I know this button is the wall command. I know it should be right here, but is that the right command? Because the icons just change it ever so slightly. I keep finding myself too, but at least you get to stay in 24 and not change. You don't have to like go bounce back and forth between previous versions. So you're probably going to get used to it as you get in. Yeah, Desiree is a little bit echoey too, I just noticed, which is funny because she was not that way before people joined. But that's okay. She's on a temporary machine because she's actually got a real computer set up on the other side. So I'm assuming she's probably not going to invest too much time in dealing with the echoey because she's setting up her other computer on the side. But yeah, I always like to put my wife on the spot. That's the whole point. So with that said, I can't remember if I brought this up at the last Revit Radio or not, that I am in Revit 24 currently. If I go into my about, you're going to see I'm in 2024.1. I think I brought this up at the last Revit Radio, but I still want to just bring it up again. Autodesk has not released a patch to 2024.1, but the point one in 2024 did break a lot of added utilities. So if you guys are up using 2024, you might debate, not upgrading to point one if you have a lot of add-on utilities. If you're not using any add-on utilities, feel free to go ahead and upgrade. But there was something with the schemas that broke a whole bunch of add-on utilities. So just wanted to go through and say that as you get into it, if you wanted to. And for those of you who are Navisworks users, Navisworks did release a 24 Surface Pack, I think last week as well. And if you don't know how to get to those things, just bringing it up for people. If you do go to manage.autodesk.com, log in with your beautiful username, password, all that fun stuff. On the left, you'll see over here, you always get the product updates. There is the Autodesk blah, blah, blah tool. What is it even called? I have no idea because it almost never works and they change it often. The Autodesk Access tool. So if you do have Autodesk Access, it will theoretically pop up and tell you tools that are out there. The new Autodesk Access has been working horribly for me. Hasn't really been finding any of it. Like it finally told me today there was a Navisworks Freedom update, which I had already downloaded late last month and installed it. And then I go to install it and it keeps telling me fail. But just if you do come into your manage.autodesk, you do have product updates on the left, and then you can start going through and seeing what you have going on. So there is all the 24 Navisworks updates. Has not been anything Revit related since the 24.1. And again, might not want to look at that. And they did also redo the interop tools as well as the IFC exporter for Revit. So if you're using any of those, then yeah, you can start getting into that. Yeah, Philip said he's having some issues with some of his add-on utilities as he gets into it. Yeah, it happened. The first one I noticed on it was just the ID8 brought it up, and they said they're having issues with their tools. I use ID8 tools, haven't had any issues, so I guess I'm not a power user of ID8 tools because I have not seen the issues that they were describing. So, guess I'm just a slacking user. So with that said, I don't have any topics to start with. I was going to bring up a topic that Desiree, for if you guys hadn't known, she actually is a new company. So if you knew her at GEI Consulting, or if you were really outdated and you knew her from Martin and Martin from years ago, yeah, she hasn't worked there for a while. But Desiree did start at a new company, and I did want to talk about something. Desiree, do you even want to share it since you created the title block? It was just a brilliant idea that the engineer currently firm that she's working on came in and how he said sets up his sheets. And I actually thought this was pretty brilliant. So I'm going to put Desiree on the spot yet again because it's what I do. On what he said he liked and how she accomplished it in Revit. So I'm gonna let you share your screen. I'm gonna stop sharing. Oh, you should be able to steal it from me, but
No, should go to one person at the start Revit. But yes, I can show it to you.
Okay. Well, as she's starting Revit, you want to talk as you're starting, or you want me to?
So the scope of well, do you have? Oh, you have it on the share. You pop it open, but it'll open maybe. I don't know.
That's right. I do have it there.
It's on BIM storage.
Yep.
It is in the template, so either the template or just the title block. But
yep.
scope of what we do new company is essentially single family housing, so lots of wood frame. So I get to set up yet again, I feel like Groundhog Day at a new company setting up a title block or a project template again. But this time I'm going about it in a little bit different way than I have in my last companies because our scope of work is much more narrow. So I feel like I could really put a lot of bells and whistles in the template and preload a lot of things that I wouldn't necessarily have done. And one of the things we were discussing was sheet sizes, because for the most part, we're a smaller sheet size, but occasionally there's a bigger one. And I want to preload a lot of typical details in the template and things like that. So I don't want the, I'm messed it up. Okay. I don't want the detail locations to move around if they're just changing sheet size. I don't want them to have to touch every typical detail and nudge it around if the detail boxes get slightly different. So I managed to sort it out that I just have the insertion point of the title block being the top corner, and the dimensions of the graphics was such that I could kind of press the easy button there. But Brian and I talked a lot about it. And it's like, what if we made the insertion point in the top corner of the detail box, which he's showing there. So that way, when you change from the bigger size to smaller size, nothing moves. So like I said, my graphics were such that I didn't need to change that margin graphics. But if I did, then it could just grow out or in or whatever. That's it.
Yeah.
That's what I did last week. It's my fancy title block.
So as you guys can see, if I start off with the 30 by 42 sheet, because they have those two, and it worked really, really well, because you're going to start here. The detail boxes were all the same. And basically, if you just kind of get in here and we eliminated these, the margin gets a little bit bigger on the left. And that's the only difference. So Desiree was able to figure out what size it needs to be for 24 by 36, realized that for a 30 by 42, it's roughly the same. And it's like they need to, like, theoretically, all 5 of them should have grown a total of 1/4 of an inch together. Is that worth it? No. So let's just shift the title block's insertion point so we can say this. I thought this was a pretty brilliant idea. I'd never seen anybody do this. So if your title block's insertion point is right here, no matter what you're doing, the detail guides don't change as you change the setups up for all the title blocks. So I have a lot of clients, we've done the same thing, and myself included. Oh, the insertion point out of the box, lower left corner, we mimicked it. Then if you change titles, view titles or whatever, you're constantly moving them around. So thought it was kind of just an interesting thought of just thinking of a new insertion point.
All the comments in the chat. Oh yeah, we do this. Oh, but Mallard does this. And I'm like, then how come none of you guys told us this? We had to come on our own. Jason has a question about what happens if the detail is bigger than the boxes. So it's top right corner, if you want to demo that. Cross your fingers it works, because that's also what I did last week. I tested it. So delete that one, then grab that one and tell it that it's too wide.
Oh, you tried, you made that instant space.
Yep. That's height.
Whichever. I'm going to delete this one too. See, I'm just preempting it to go 4.
There you go. There's some features in there to make the title, the actual space for the title, bigger as well. It's not as fancy as some of the detail boxes I've built in the past, but like I said, I think for what the scope of work that we do, I can get a lot more specific, and I don't necessarily have to make everything quite so flexible because I don't have to bend, far for other scopes of work or other types of projects. Jeff, that's what it looks like.
So I don't know, just to me, it was one of those ones getting into and thinking about, like my profile families, I have an adjustable insertion point. I've done a lot of those different things to try to start coming up with the stuff, but just the fact of thinking, hey, put the insertion point right there so the title block grows from that point. Who cares where its insertion point is? The question is, did you insert that to 0, 0 on the title block, or what did you do? So I'm going to go into place origin marker, and let's see where the origin is in here. Oh, so the upper right corner of your title block.
It just worked out that way. If the graphics on the right margin changed with the sheet size, I would have scooped that over to be the top of the detail box, but It worked out just fine like this.
And you asked the question, is that a nested generic annotation family inside the title block?
It's not. It's set on top of the sheet. Because if I know title block, then I don't have as much control. Yeah. But in the past, I've done nest in a detailed drawing guide or all sorts of things like that into the detail box as well. I know it was fun when I was in this because I haven't built a title block in ages. And that's the other thing is being a consulting structural engineer, I'm never using my own title block, right? So I had to build the detail boxes and things like that to be as flexible as possible for whatever I got. But I did notice some differences in the schedule. So in this case, a revision schedule and some, I think, enhancements, some nice new features with within the schedule tools. Set print area, Beth says, not to be centered, but right justified, then anything you put to the right is just extra stuff. Yeah, yes, great tip, Beth.
The other thing I was going to ask, since I thought this was great, had never heard of somebody making an insertion point up here. So my next thought is we bounce this idea around. Has anybody thought of making the view title have the detail box inside of it? Is anybody out there doing that? So since you guys aren't asking questions to me, I'm going to ask questions back to you guys. It was just a thought that we were coming up with, because as you can see, we've got the view title. Oops, that's broken.
Dang it. Well, I just finished that on Friday, so I haven't really trouble.
You weren't thinking about work Friday before a long weekend? No, so the question was, is anybody thinking, because we ran this idea of you could make the view title include the detail box. When you put on the sheet, the detail box came up. We actually kind of were thinking that's not the best idea, because the detail box, I can move it, I can use the move command, I can snap to its insertion point and snap to something else. Unfortunately, view titles, you can use move, but you can't snap to anything within that view title. No lines or anything inside the view title can be snapped to. So we were kind of like, ooh, maybe it's a bad idea, because I want the boxes to absolutely be snapped. And then if the view titles changed or whatever it was going to do, then we could come in and just move that. And if that's off slightly, who cares? But the boxes, you want to be going through and do it. So I didn't know if anybody's doing that or not. Just kind of something that we were debating and doing, but we thought otherwise of that process.
I also plan on preloading sheets and boxes and things, and you can show how you can copy and paste the sheets with the detail boxes already on there. And so you can get these in there very quickly, copy and pasting them, or even a whole sheet. So there's a sort of, but no. Use a view extends detail item that can be globally toggled on and off. Never done a fold box. Yeah, the snapping was sort of the deal breaker for me. Those really need to snap together, I think. I remember how many times I messed with this darn thing. I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I was looking. And for those of you also didn't know, you might have noticed that I put an origin marker in here. If you guys are using pyRevit and you go to the edit drop down, there is a place origin marker. I love this freaking tool. I use this all of the time. Like if you go create a new drafting view and you're like, cool, or a new legend or anything else that you go create, and you want to come in there and say, oh, let me go place a new, let me go create a new legend. Cool, new legend. I want to start working around the 0, 0. So if I copy from one legend to the next, you don't see these in there. You can visibility graphics. It's not like you get origin marker or anything. I mean, internal origins turn on. All of this is turned on for this legend, but it's not like that displays. And but you can come in here into pyRevit and be like, okay, under the edit drop down, you can say place origin marker. And this will then give you, here's the 0, 0 for that view, right? So it's kind of a nice little tool to know. And all it does is go draw two detail lines. So it's just thin line, detail line. It just grabs the out of the box one and just puts two detail lines there. So once you start working or once you do whatever, you can delete that, draw a reference plane from that point if you wanted to, etc. So it's just a great idea, just a great tool to have. I actually had one client I went to and they were complaining about Revit because whenever they copied and pasted things from any view, it never pasted to the right thing, any non-plan view. So they would go into like their legends and copy and paste current view, nothing lined up. They even did it in their title blocks and nothing lined up. And I'm like, why is this not lining up for you? It was hilarious. Came to find out that I think whoever originally created their template deleted the title block family and then came in and was like, oh, so I delete the title block family. And here's like, oh, okay, cool. Most people don't know you can go to the view tab and then you can say place a title block. I think they just started doing this. So I think somebody removed their title block and then just randomly went back and put the title block on every one. So not a single title block was in the same location on any of the sheets in their project. It was like, wow. So yes, I had to, this was a lifesaver for me, the pyRevit tool. Because prior to that, what did you do? You inserted an AutoCAD file, you linked an AutoCAD file from 0, 0. So you have a little line from 0, 0. Then you draw a reference plane, then you'd unlink that AutoCAD file. It's kind of a pain in the butt.
Added in about putting in reference planes at the corners.
Oh, can't hear you. I don't know what's happening, but you just like were sounded like you were a mile away.
I don't know.
About the same. Can you get closer to the computer, maybe?
Be awkward. Right. Ben added putting reference planes, or in my case, I used reference lines to make the edges of the box snappy, which is exactly how I did it. All right, so I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is we only have one question. The good news is it's such a large topic you could speak for the rest of the hour and then. Oh, sorry, Rick. Here, I guess you have to talk, Brian, because they can't hear me.
Yeah, she does sound like she's in a tin can. I agree. Again, I can hear you. You're just very echoey.
I don't know what to tell you.
So question came up, it's shared coordinates, how to get them, how to use them, etc. My head is spinning. So I do shared coordinates different than a lot of people. Often I'm doing shared coordinates and I'm coming in and getting a DWG from an engineer. And whoever is the lead on the project, in my mind, it's their responsibility to start setting up the shared coordinates. If you're one of the other people in the project, not prime, if you're the MEP engineer, structural engineer, or whoever's not prime, then theoretically, all you should have to do is acquire coordinates from the prime's model. In Revit, that's very simple. You just go up to your manage tab, you go to coordinates, and you would say acquire coordinates. Can't do that from a sheet view, it'd have to be in plan view. And as long as you're going through and do that, then you just literally pick the linked file and you acquire the coordinates. For me, however I do this, I always create an entirely separate model that I call my site locator. And what I do for this is I link in that DWG file that's going to have all my coordinates. I don't link it in origin to origin. I try to find something in that DWG and I move it to the Revit internal origin. There's usually a survey marker or a property line or something that I know is not going to move. I'm not going to move like the tree that was there to that place. I try to find something in that DWG and I place that into the CAD background or the CAD background to here. Once I do that in the file here, I acquire coordinates from that CAD background. Now, what Revit's really good about is the X and the Y. Revit is not great about the Z. So in my files, I always come in here and I'm just going to go back into the file over here. When I start getting in here and I do it into my file, I go ahead and go in and create a C level. So if literally I'm in my site locator, which I probably have one that I've recently opened. Let me go look. Cool, site locator. So what I end up doing is I create a C level in my site locator file, as well as then a level for any buildings going into it. So if it's a campus with 5 buildings, I say building elevation, building A elevation, building B elevation, building C elevation, etc. But my still C level is going to be called my MSL. I'm going to create that C level. It's called MSL because I called it C level once, and a civil engineer is like, well, is that high tide or low tide? I'm like, what? They're like, well, the mean sea level is the average of high tide and low tide. So I now call it mean sea level, just in case anybody else is going to be looking at what's going on there. So when I set that up, I do the mean sea level, then I have one for each building elevation. The CAD file I bring in at sea level, because if I am working with a civil engineer, usually everything's at the sea level elevation, except for things like contours, etc. So once we get into those contours, etc., then we can start coming in and getting into, okay, cool, now those are going to be up at the building elevation-ish, and we're going to be going through and looking at the other tools. So when you start looking at that, that's how I go through and set up. I've acquired coordinates from that, so my survey point may or may not move, but I will get my northing and eastings. I then link my Revit file into my site locator, and I rotate it, I elevate it, I move it where it needs to be moved to. So once I do that, if I'm not on BIM 360 or the Autodesk Construction Cloud, I can simply publish the coordinates back to my own architectural file. Since I can't publish coordinates if it's on ACC or BIM 360, then what I do is I literally just trace a couple grid lines, grid line 1 and grid line A, in my site locator, but I call it the SL, or building A, grid 1, building A, grid A, whatever it's going to be, right? Just so I can differentiate. These are my site locator grids, and I only do 2 grids. I do one and the other. I already have a level. Now I have those grids. Now, since I can't publish coordinates, I save the site locator model. I then open up my building. I bring in the site locator model and I align it to those 2 grid lines, and I go into elevation and I align it. I'm not moving the building, I'm moving the site locator model. Now that it's in there, I can acquire those coordinates. Oh, looks like Desiree is not a host anymore. I gotta go make her a host. Make host. There you go.
Better?
Oh, way better.
Well, new computer.
New computer, not a 10-year-old computer. So once I've done that, now I've acquired the coordinates and it's set up there. And the reason why I do it this way is then somebody's going to come back in, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and be like, oh, well, sorry, we got to rotate that building half a degree, or we need to elevate that building by blah, blah, blah. We need to change where it is on the site. Again, I just go back to my site locator. I reposition that building. I realign the grids in the site locator file to it, save it, go back to my building, reload that site locator file, realign, and then reacquire coordinates. It won't, unfortunately, let you reacquire coordinates, so you do have to go say reset coordinates before you can go reacquire them. Oh, that's really weird. I can only see half of my chat pod. There we go. So that's how I go through and do it. It sounds really complicated, but it's the way I found the easiest way to do it is now I've got that coordinate and I've got that separate file, and I didn't realize this was going to take forever. I literally just had this one open on Friday. But I have that set up and located, so now I can just go ahead and move those buildings, reposition them, then go back into the files, remove the site locator, and reacquire those coordinates. And this is how I always do it. I work on very large projects. I'm currently on a large airport where there's probably 15 different building models linked into it, not like different disciplines, just like 15 separate buildings linked into this. And yes, we've had some issues of, oh, now we've actually surveyed this and we went out there and you need to move the building 9 inches this way, 1 inch that way, whatever. I always reposition it, save that file, go back into each building file, and then realign that site locator and reacquire the coordinates. And it has been working for me quite well for the better part of better part of a decade, if not two, and that's how I've always done it. That also now assumes I actually have some sort of CAD DWG. If you don't have a CAD DWG and you start getting into it, then the other way to do this, and I do it this way as well, I just usually have a civil file that I'm working with. But the other way to do it is in your coordinate and your manage tab coordinates, you can specify coordinates at a point. So if you don't have any of that, you can go into a point, like maybe you've got the corner of the building or a grid intersection or whatever else you might have. You go into your coordinates, you go into specify coordinates at a point, and then you just click a point in the file, and then you give it the northing and the easting in that file when you do it. It's not going to pick up on rotation, so you then also have to go back in and get into the rotation. So if you come down here and start looking, so you'll see here, this is my site locator file. That's my sea level. If I look in here, that's my MSL, my mean sea level. And if I come up here and start looking at this, I'm just going to go to DG and hide all the Revit links currently. So you'll see that I've got this. This is my level here. And then for each building, I have the different buildings. There's 3 buildings in this particular project. And you'll see a whole bunch of little dots up here. This is one of my survey files that came in for me. It's a control point file for a laser scan, but I did bring that in as well as the actual original site plan when we did this. So I got my sea level, I've got my different building elevations. And like I said, in the visibility graphics, then I go into each one of those links and I go ahead and move it up in the Z-axis to bring it up to that level where it's supposed to be. And then I go into my plan, rotate it, move it, etc. Then back in the sea level view of this, in my sea level view, I just put a grid line for that building. So if I come back into sea level, you'll see that here's where the 0, 0, or here's where the origin was from the CAD file. So my survey point moved out there. But if I kind of come back in here and zoom, you're going to see that I've put a grid line over the top of that building's grid line and a grid line over here. And each one of these wings are their own separate Revit file. And then I just called it, hey, this is site grid K12. This is my site, grid 12.2. Synchronize or synchronize this file, go back into each one of those buildings, align it, rotate it, acquire coordinates. Like I said, if this wasn't in the cloud, I could skip that step, go to manage coordinates and just say publish, but you can't publish coordinates through Autodesk Construction Cloud. Okay. If not, like I had said, you can also come down here to coordinates if you don't have that, and you can say specify coordinates at a point. So if I go say specify coordinates at a point, I can pick a point on something in the model. Unfortunately, you can't click grids. So if you have a grid intersection, it doesn't work. But you could go draw a reference plane there. I can't pick on a grid. I can't do this. You'll see that I can grab like the endpoint of this. I can grab the dot here, the dot here. Any of those endpoints I can grab. Then once I do those, I can come back and say, oh, here's the northing and easting of that. I'll do this. Gives me the northing and easting. Hey, that's what it is. But it does not give you rotation. I guess you could type in rotation if you knew the rotation of your project right here. You can also go back into, if you don't know it in your rotation, you can go grab your origin. And when you select your origin, you can just change that rotation if need be. Again, that would be doing that in your project file, not in some sort of site locator file. Because my site locator file is always set to be true north.
Or shared coordinates in 15 minutes or less.
So that's my quick tip. The problem with shared coordinates is most people do it once a year, maybe, twice a year. I do it once a week.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of second nature to me. But I have clients who do this is like, they have projects that last 6 years. Because yeah, I know you told me this 6 years ago and I wrote these notes down. So it's still the same. And what do my notes mean? So it's kind of one of those scenarios. If you're not doing it all the time, it gets a little bit it gets a little bit crazy to try to come through and set it up. So hopefully that answers shared coordinates in 15 minutes.
One question was, are we recording and it's available?
Oh, yes. It'll be on my YouTube channel. Just Google the Revit Geek and you'll find me.
And your next question is, what do you typically see a shared parameter file used for? Do you see it for materials, or what is typically used for? I recently just had to deal with start a shared coordinates file even though I'm barely getting into project template and content creation, because for whatever reason, Autodesk doesn't think that EOR should be a project parameter. So that's the first one that I have in my file, but we both use a ton. So go
And
ahead.
for the
Brian.
woman who started in a new industry and people using acronyms, I'm going to call you out here. EOR, somebody might not know what that is.
Engineer of record.
There you go.
The name of the guy who's responsible if the building falls down.
So shared coordinates, or excuse me, we're going from shared coordinates to shared parameters. I'm going to screw that up. I know it is. So shared parameters, technically you need to make it a shared parameter if you want to tag and or schedule. If you just want to schedule something, then you're going to be just fine creating what's called a project parameter. But if you're going to want to be able to create a tag and a schedule, then you need it to be a shared parameter. Also, I would say if you're doing any automation or API adding, so anything with Dynamo or anything through the API, and you want to be able to constantly recall things, it's easier to do it as a shared parameter because you can call up the GUI for it. Some of the API technology is a little bit more difficult to call up just the parameter names because you could have duplicate names that are the same. So could do it, you can set up. There are people in the industry, and Michael's saying right now, everything should be a shared parameter. I don't personally agree with that. But there are definitely times where a lot of people like, hey, I just want everything to be a shared parameter. The biggest thing about shared parameters is understanding that Revit doesn't care what you name a shared parameter. I constantly go, I have an ideate tool, which will start showing me all the parameters in a project. I go into people's projects and say, okay, let me see all the parameters in there. Be parameters associated with families, etc. And I'll go into some projects where there's literally 35 width parameters because different companies are using a parameter called width, etc., etc. So the biggest thing for me is making sure that your company is going to understand we have a single shared parameter file. Now, with that said, I don't use shared parameter files anymore. I'm still in the process of converting this all over. And Jason, you might have to help me find it. No, here it is, the Manage tab. Autodesk came out with this thing called parameter services. I think it was about 2.5 years ago, and they've been actually developing this quite a bit, quite a bit in the last year or so. What the parameter service is it allows you to host your shared parameters, if we're going to call them that, up on the cloud. And then everybody or people you give rights to can start accessing those shared parameters. So what's really, really, really nice, and Jason says he's not completely sold on it yet. What's really nice about this is you can have a shared parameter master file, if you want to call it that. Then you can choose certain ones of those parameters and break them out into sub files. So they're still in the master file. The master file still controls it, but you can group them out into separate groups and then give different users rights to those parameters. So where I'm thinking this is going to be great, like in an MEP world, I can have the company master shared parameter file. It's one file in the cloud, but then I can have electrical ones grouped out, or maybe just electrical lighting grouped out versus electrical power, or whatever you want to do. I've been kind of liking this, and the reason why I'm liking it is I've had too many companies have multiple versions of their shared parameter file and not know it. Somebody grabbed one that was a year old from some sort of backup folder or something. So they started adding parameters into it. Somebody else is in a different shared parameter file adding parameters to it. And now they've added parameters of the same name. But again, Revit doesn't care. Because the whole thing about parameters within Revit is they all have, everything in Revit has a GUI behind the scene. Shared parameters are explicit to that. So if I go look at my shared parameter file, I'm going to pull this down. So if I go look at my shared parameter file, you're going to see in this notepad thing, no, I'll do that later. Revit could care less what you name it. This is what Revit is looking for. So Revit's caring about the guide, the GUI that you're putting inside of here. They could all be called the same thing. I could have 15 parameters called foundation thickness, thickness foundation, and I could do that, but Revit wouldn't care, and I could load those all into it. So kind of a big thing when you start looking at that and you get into it, that this is what's big about the shared parameter file. So if you do have it, you got to make sure that not everybody has rights to either this file or your parameter service file online. But you need to be able to come through here and start playing with what's going on and setting this up and understanding what's going on. Now, with that said, if you're in Revit trying to go do something, and I'll go back over here. No, that's still the same project. I'm gonna close that one. Actually, I'm just gonna close all hidden come back here to Desiree's blank template. No, that's my blank template. If I were to come in here and start needing to add a shared parameter to this project, then once I start coming here to look at this, what I can do is I can go to my Manage tab and I can go say shared parameters. So that shared parameter file you just saw in Notepad, this file here, this is what it's going to look like in Revit. So you have different groupings. So you can have groups up here. You can start going through and seeing what your groups are, etc. One tip I always have to people, if you need to keep loading a whole bunch of shared parameters into your project and you're using the shared parameters, not the parameter services, you can only do it one at a time. Rename your group to go to the top. Like, oh man, today I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff with openings. I will literally go rename my group from miscellaneous with the underscore to get it back alphabetical. And then I'll literally come down here into my like openings one. Oops, here, go to openings, and I'll rename my openings with an underscore. And the reason why I say this is now when I go add a parameter file, add frame depth, I'm going to say, okay, it's now added frame depth. Oh, sorry. When I go to add this, sorry, I got to go add a parameter. I'll change that in my file. And here's why. Now, when I go add it as a project parameter, or if I'm in a family and I'm going to go add it as a family parameter, once I start adding this in here, now when I go say, cool, I want to go create a new parameter. I want it to be a shared parameter. And I got to go select. It'll dump me into that family. So renaming the grouping becomes really, really nice. I've got to go add 10 of these. But as like I said, inside of here, I can't control and grab more than one. The parameter service, you could. The other reason why I like the parameter service is you can default. Now that I've added to this, you can default. What group does it go under? Oh, no, no, no. Well, as a company, we put this under forces. You don't have to worry about people assigning it to the wrong groups. You also don't have people worried about people assigning it to the wrong objects. You can have it preloaded to say, hey, you're always going to go into forces and you're always going to be grouped under doors. You can tweak that when loading it, but by default, that's what it checks. So that's the other reason why I'm really, really, really liking the shared parameters or the parameter service that Autodesk has been coming out into it. They're still working on some permission issues, but I think that will get resolved once everybody's done taking their sabbaticals. But so this is what's there. This is a shared parameter. So I've just added a new parameter called frame thickness. It's going to be grouped under, and by grouping that's here, under forces, and I've made it an instance parameter for doors. All right, so I've now added that to any door I put inside of here. So if I go draw a wall, this is a structural file. So let me go back to structure and add a wall so I don't have to change my grouping. So I'm gonna go draw a wall. I'm going to put a door in. No doors are loaded in this project. I got to go load one. Oh, and I don't even have my shortcuts set yet. Let's see. Right, I had to get that set up for 24. Openings. I will go add a door. Looks great.
You have a couple follow-up questions
Yep.
here too.
So now that I've loaded that door, crap, my wall's not long enough for that door. Oh no, it's because you were in a structural template and it's not tall enough. 33 feet tall, that looks great. And so now that I've loaded this door into here and I select it, I made that instance great parameter. I grouped it under, what did I group it under? Something stupid. Forces. Did I group it under forces? Am I not saying it? Did I hit cancel? Like an idiot. I must have hit cancel. But what I was going to show you if I did it properly is now every single door in the project would have that value for you to grab. You could also go use that shared parameter to tag it if you want, or you could use it for scheduling. So that's truly when shared parameters are there. There are a few things that I've learned that I have added shared parameters for. If I were to switch this from one door family to another door family, and I wanted it to maintain values, like I never really figured I was ever going to schedule my swing angle on a door. When I originally started my doors way back 18 years ago, none of these were shared parameters. But then when I switched it from one door type to another door type, my angles went back to the default of 90 or whatever the default for that family was. So I started looking at things of, oh, if I swap it from one family type to another, that should also be something that I need to be shared, because I did find out that that does break if it's not shared. So yes, shared parameter for scheduling and tagging, absolutely. But there are other reasons, like in the case of this, oh, if I swap it out and I made one of those door swings 45, I want the other one to understand it should be 45 as well. So that's when a lot more shared parameters start coming in. The other thing for me on knowing when to use shared parameters is if I want to not necessarily schedule it for scheduling purposes, but to schedule it for manipulation purposes. So I come through here, and a lot of my families, the materials are going to be shared parameters. Not because I ever plan on scheduling necessarily the materials on this stuff, but because I want to be able to change these values via a schedule. So I do need to make it a shared parameter to schedule it. So if that's the case, I want to be able to manipulate it via a schedule. That needs to be a shared parameter. So hopefully that answers that question.
You sort of already answered, do you have a method to keep your shared parameter file organized?
To a point, most of that. So for me, when I'm talking shared parameters, I do a lot of general shared parameters. And what I mean by that is, first off, I used underscores for all my shared parameters. So I know my shared parameters have underscores in them. But the other thing for me is like hardware is the example I always like to use. I go to so many clients' offices and they have door hardware, window hardware, toilet hardware, casework hardware. Why not just have a family called hardware if it's just something simple like a text parameter? Now, if it's a family parameter where you're swapping out family types, I get that you can't do it. But so for me, you'll see things very much similar, like length. I have a generic length. I have a generic material. I have a generic quantity. I have a generic radius. I have a generic size. I have a lot of generic parameters. But if I do then get into more things like openings, where I've got more specific things, hey, these are all for the frame. These are all for the host. These are all for this. So I try to go in and make a lot of this stuff generic. Like I have another generic one. This might actually just be, no, I think it's a shared parameter. If I go into my miscellaneous, I think I have one called detail 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, like here, width points, width. These are all generic. I have generic text ones. So if I come down here to my text, I have generic text multi-line. And there's a lot of times if I just need a text value, I didn't want to say, like I use this structurally. I don't want to say reinforcing top, reinforcing bottom, reinforcing this, because you start just ballooning the amount of parameters that go into your project and it gets confusing to manipulate and manage. So I have a simple one called text01. I might assign text01 to structural framing. I might assign text01 to walls. Then in my schedule, I determine, oh, text01 is reinforcing top. And I just rename the header of the schedule. Oh, text01 is walls is whatever value you want it to be. So I believe in keeping a lot of the things generic. Most of my clients hate that attitude. Some of them love it. They're like, yes, I don't really know why I have door detail or head detail, jam detail, sill detail, and then I have a different thing for casework detail and a different thing. It's like, it's just a text parameter. Why don't we just go ahead and use, detail 01, detail 02, detail 03? The other thing for me too, and this is one that I talk about, is I have multi-line generics. A lot of people in a schedule want to be able to hit like return and be able to control the width of each line in the schedule and what they're typing in. Biggest example of this is interiors architects and the material descriptions. Hey, I want to say this is maybe the manufacturer Sherwin-Williams, but the model, I want to be able to do blah, 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 return, blah, blah, blah. So think about using multi-line text as well. I don't see multi-line text used that often when people create parameters, but multi-line text, excuse me, if you don't know what that is, it's like if you go into your project information, project information, where am I? Sheet parameters, global parameters. Right here, the big button, not the little button, and you go to look at the address for your project information. This is a multi-category or multi-line text. Lets you come up here, hit enter, type in some more stuff, hit enter, type in some more stuff, hit enter. And that's how that would appear in a schedule if you did it that way. So you can control where you want the line breaks rather than just having it word wrap only. So think about generic things for multi-line text as well. But that's really for me, when we start getting into setting that up of, okay, generic things, shared parameters. If you need to manipulate, schedule it, whatever, those are the type of things you can start doing. Did I miss anything, Desiree?
What?
Did I miss anything?
I think you pretty much got these, but you might want to clarify. I answered one via text. It's now in the insert tab if you wanted to revisit it, because I've got to run to my other call. No one but someone in your team that creates parameters needs the shared parameter file, correct? I don't have to send the shared parameter file for schedules to work correctly. And then the
Yeah,
one
that is correct. No, the shared parameter file, it's like I've heard the analogy a few times in the industry. It's like a recipe. Once you put the flour in the cake, you no longer need the original flour. You just have the cake. And it's kind of the same thing. You don't need the shared parameter file. You don't need to share that shared parameter file. You're good with that. You can just start jumping into it. So yes, that's the case. You do not need to share the shared parameter file to other users. It's just like if you go download something from a manufacturer and you look at it, 99% of manufacturers' parameters are shared parameters, but you don't get their shared parameter file. So that's kind of how that sets up. So don't need to pass it off. Don't need to share it if you don't need to when you get into it. So that's the case. Now, if somebody gave you something with a shared parameter and you want to reuse it, a manufacturer gave it to you, you want to add it, etc. One of the things when you start getting into there, if I were to come back up here to my project parameters and I find that value that's a shared parameter, if I were to go edit the shared parameter and I did not point to my shared parameter file, I would get this export button here. So it knows it's a shared parameter and it would allow me to export it. So if I got something from a manufacturer or somebody else gave me their shared parameter file, and I have clients do this to me all the time, like, hey, here's my families. Can you make this work? And then they give me a door family. Can you go create a tag for that door family? I don't have their shared parameters that they want tagged. So I have to open up the door family, hit the export it out to a shared parameter file. Then therefore I could bring that in and use that inside of any tag or anything else. So you can export shared parameter files or shared parameters from any family. You don't have to have the file. So hopefully that answers that question. And then it looks like we have a follow-up. What's your methodology for when you name a shared parameter with or without a leading underscore? This has evolved over the years, and so it's not necessarily thought out in the best way. But originally, most of my parameters were more than one word. So whenever it was a space, I use an underscore. I'm old school. I go back to the DOS space days of things where spaces were a special character. I also don't use spaces currently because if it's something that's hosted online and online sees it as a space, that's a percent 20. And I don't like that the percent 20 coming in when I see that. So for me, anything that didn't have it there, but yet if I go back to my miscellaneous ones like that were just length and there was no spaces in the words, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going to put the underscore in it. There's still some I have in here that are really, really old that I don't like. Wall thickness is not, but there are some of these in here like this width. I didn't even know where this width came from. I probably need to remove it, or I exported it from a client and it's just inside of here. But yeah, most of them I at one point in time said, I'm going to start putting an underscore so they all group together. I don't know if I like that theory or not, but it definitely had to do something for all the ones that did not have a space in them. And like I said, I come into some of these that were like really, really old. I don't even think I use any of these anymore. But it's like, oh, these ones didn't have the underscores. And so by adding the underscore, I knew it was my scenario. I don't believe in putting my company acronym in there. I think that's kind of crazy. If you've got a great naming convention and you stick to that, usually you don't need to have your company acronym in there as well. Okay. I'm not going to tell her you said that you missed a Rick. It's just I'm just going to dismiss that question altogether. Okay, I'm just going through these. Looks like I got them all. And then Rowan did follow up with, oh my God, multi-line text. When did that come out? Oh God, it's a very long time ago, Rowan. I would say probably 10 years ago, the multi-line text. I just never see anybody use it. Partially, I think it's because when you go to create a project parameter and you're like, oh, new parameter, and you go down there and you start buzzing, you just go down to the text value. You're like, cool, I need this to be text. You see text up here? Multi-line text is all the way down here at the bottom, not even in alphabetical order. So it's kind of like, oh, you type in text and you see it up here. You don't see that multi-line text is all the way at the bottom to be using that multi-line text. Yeah, because I hate when people use title line 1, title line 2, title line 3, etc. There's another one that I hate that still goes back to the old school is like when you look at a tag. She's got only those in there. Screw it. I'll just edit her title block real quick. The other one that still makes me laugh is for the tags when people do tags as separate labels. So like if I were, that's just going to be her thing. If I come in here and people have got like labels stacked, they'll do like sheet number, and then below sheet number they have sheet description or whatever, and they like stack them all up. Most people don't have any clues that you can just add these, and if you put a break up here, you can add as many parameters as you want, and you still go into some of these old school tags that Revit hasn't updated, where it's like one's right justified, there's an at symbol, then one's left justified next to it. Definitely in a lot of the structural tags. So it's like, no, I could have just done this, and then I could have a suffix of at, and then I can say no spaces if I don't hit a break. I can say 0 spaces here, and it's literally going to be this at then that. You don't even need to do anything there. And actually, it's worse. It's better to usually do it as a prefix. But yeah, so I do this all the time. And I get people like, oh, how'd you do that? And it's like, well, I just did a multi-level label. So you can do that as well. And Sean asked, can you use M text in a sheet name? Absolutely. So I'm inside of here. If I were to go in a sheet name, if you're not using the out of the box, you could. I would never use M text in not out of the, I would never use the non out of the box sheet name, name value, me personally. But any parameter like associated to a title block, then yes, I could come in here now, create a parameter. Oops, misclicked. Create a parameter, create a new parameter. You'll see it's got to be shared, but you'll see if I go, well, it doesn't have to be shared. New, this, I just call it MT for multi-line text. Go down here to multi-line text, group it under text, and there we go. Now I've got a multi-line text label that I can use inside of here. So cool. Got that one, got that one. Let me close out the title block. I actually did open her template too. No, I'm in her project. I did open her template. So you got to remember to save so I don't break Desiree's company template. I control W this. Why, as I say that, I want to close her template now before I break something in it. Okay. So we got a question from Ben. We have gotten an RFP saying we need to hand over an LOD 400 model. God, I hate that. As design, build, architect, and structural, I've been asked to give a brief narrative and cost differential from LOD 3 to 4. We usually are modeling between 250 and 300 for most components. To the best of my understanding, there's no adopted national standard for LOD. There is, and we'll talk about that. It seems if you don't have components created to that LOD, it would be pretty daunting. I also would assume this would mean that all of these subs would have to model LOD, and theirs would be the same crazy overlap. So Ben, answer this question. There is a standard for LOD, and that would be the I just drew total mind blank of what they are called. That would be if I come down here, LOD. It is under a BIM the BIM Forum. Thank you, LOD. I knew somebody would come up with it. BIM Forum. So BIM Forum does have LOD. My biggest problem with LOD and people who are asking for LOD 400 is they're not asking for LOD 400. So way back when BIM Forum started this like 10, 15 years ago, and I knew several people who started this, I was arguing with them that most people think it's level of detail. And so they're saying you need to go to LOD 400, and it's insanely stupid. I have it. If I come into my BD Mackie, BIM, LOD 21. So this is going to be a little bit old, but you'll get the point here. But and if you talk to most end users, and I've worked with several airports, like we need LOD 400 or 450. And I sit down, I show them what that means. What they truly want is LOI 400. The LOD can be 200. And what I mean by LOI is its level of information. So most places out there, they don't need the fabric mesh modeled, the screws modeled on the chair you're delivering to them. It's a flipping chair. They need a dumb 2D symbol for the chair. They need the level of information. So I always sit down when we start talking about LOD saying, look, do you need LOD or do you need LOI? And I've actually gotten several airports, Denver being one of them, Nashville being another one, a few airports, to change their verbiage to level of development versus level of information. Because it's not the level of information that the people are looking for, especially when you're talking facility detail. It's level of information when you're talking facilities. They don't care about everything. And LOD 400, I'm currently on a project where that was required. So the subcontractor has modeled every single CMU. The files are getting so damn slow and nobody can open them. So they keep turning some of these models off, even in Navisworks, right? This is LOD 400 for a CMU wall. I understand needing to know maybe where grouted cells are. I understand needing this, but do you really need to model all of the mortar? That does nothing for anybody. Having a generic block, possibly. Having the reinforcement, maybe. But more of what they need is, hey, this is the area you're not allowed to penetrate. That's what they're looking for. And we can do that in other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be as an LOD. The other one that always cracks me up are windows. If I can get my fingers in the right keys. If we go to window and we start looking at LOD 400 on a window, and that's page 78. Let's see if this one. I'm trying to look for the one that has the image. But if you start looking at it, it talks about how you, especially like on a curtain wall, talks about how you've got to model the extrusion of the aluminum curtain wall exactly to the extrusion. You've got to go in and put in all the screws, all the gasketing when you start seeing that as well. And I can't find it. Is it 117? I don't know. It's in here somewhere. Right? Here's another good one when you start talking about walls. You get an LOD 400 of framing. They want, so they say LOD 400 wood frame. They want you to model every single stud. We don't do that. Yeah, you need to model the sealant. If you look at LOD 400 on a residential like wood frame, they expect you to model the construction adhesive between the joists and the plywood. What does that do for anybody? Nobody cares that there's physically a piece of construction adhesive there. And if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. If you've needed that on a project, cool. Tell me you've needed that on a project. I want to see real world examples where people need to do that, right? 350 in my mind is even getting too much most of the time. Most of the time, people need this LOD 300. Where a metal stud is going to be located does not affect anybody in any way, shape, or form when they start getting into this. So as you start getting into some of this, yeah, so here we go. There's your, here's your, like, again, here's your LOD 400 for a regular wall. You know, so you're going to model the sheathing separate. You're going to model the vapor barrier. You're going to model the clips, all of this stuff going in. You need to model weep holes, right? So you need to model those weep holes. So again, I always say LOI. And no, there is nothing out there in the industry for LOI. And I actually laughed last week on LinkedIn. I saw somebody else talking about this. So in my Excel spreadsheet, I think it's in that same folder. In my Excel spreadsheet, I think it's in my own folder though. I've taken the BIM Forum LOD matrix and I've inserted into mine an LOI. So mine comes out with a level of development, that's the model reference, and then I come out with an LOI, which is the level of information you're going to get. Then I come back down here under like the notes or whichever I have it, and I say, hey, my note is going to say this, and this is what you can expect from my LOD versus my LOI. And that's how I go through and set it up. And you'd be amazed at how many building owners or people requiring this is saying this is a way better scenario to have. So this is all free from BIM Forums. You can go download all of this. Like I said, I've just actually modeled in LOI columns inside of here. And I've taken it a little bit to that step just to start going in there and doing it. So hopefully that makes sense. The level of development, just literally go download this and show this to your company saying, okay, here's what they expect out of this for LOD 400. Tell me we're going to deliver this. Because what I always tell somebody is if they're trying to go from LOD 300 to 400, double your fee. Whatever your fee is, double it because you're going to forget stuff. It's going to come in. When they start asking, why is this fee going to be doubled? You then show this to the person requiring it. And they're like, oh God, we don't need all that. I don't need every single brick modeled. Can you imagine modeling every brick on a brick facade? Cool. Does no big deal for you. And I'm trying to look at some of the other ones that were inside of here that were just, let's go back to the previews. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So there's your LOD 400 window. Make sure you model every extrusion exact. Make sure you model the internal thermal breaks inside of the things. Make sure you model every backer rod and sealant. Make sure you model the nuts and the washers that put the whole thing together. And make sure it's also cut as they, go together, that these are recessed back properly and everything. There is no reason for facilities. Yeah. There is no reason for a facilities company to ever need this. They need to know, hey, this overall assembly was this type. We call somebody to replace it or fix this type of assembly. They're not going to go into the online documentation to see, oh, well, did they put backer rod and sealant in that? What kind of rubber gasketing was built into that? No, that's what specs are for. That's what cut sheets are for. You do not actually need that. Ben, I can't imagine the hot rod supercomputer you would need for that. Yeah, it just always cracks me up when I hear people talk about it. Oh, and then this is your hangers. So they're saying LOD 400 and you need to model hangers. You can't just model a standard hanger. If your hanger has some sort of like fastener to it to allow for, movement, then you've got to model the bolts, the hinged movement piece as well as you start getting into some of this stuff. And I also love it when I always see people say LOD 400 for clearances. I'm sorry, isn't a clearance a mass volume by default? What is LOD 400 for a clearance? The clearance by definition is a mass volume. So I'm not too sure on that one. So as you start getting into that, yes, there you go. That's what you can start saying. For me, I just don't really get into the LOD aspect when people start looking at it. Someone's on crack if they're asking for all of that. Hey, like I said, I'm currently on an airport project where the contractor went in and modeled every piece of CMU because they were told they had to model the LOD 4 or 500. So every CMU block is modeled. As we get into Navisworks, it's really cool looking. You see every block is labeled with the type of CMU block it is. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so pointless. They've got hangers that look like this. I mean, you start zoom in here. They've got hangers where they're modeling it, wrapping around the pipe. It's not just some generic thing. And it's like, cool, you go to town. I think it's a complete waste of time. And I'm going to laugh when they go to put this into their GIS software for facilities, and it's just going to blow up their software. But did they model the aggregate in the graph? Okay, that's funny, Michael. No, that's LOD 600. Come on, Michael. We're only at 400. We don't need to model the aggregate. Okay, so one last question inside of here. I have a schedule with 6 fields I need to sort by to avoid the varies value. Is there a way to do that? Absolutely. So when we're inside of Revit and we start looking at any schedule, schedules are 100% based on the sorting and grouping tab. So if I were to, I'm just going to go to a sheet index. This is going to make sense for everybody. If I were to come into the sheet index and I go back in here to my sorting and grouping, no, because those are all individual values. Terrible example. Let me come back to structural column schedule. Okay, so we can start coming in here and I'm listing out every single one of these. Right now, the length is different values, correct? So if I come down here and I go to the sorting and grouping tab, right now, I have this schedule being sorted by the base level, top level, and type, right? So these all have base level, top level, height, but I'm saying itemize every instance. If I uncheck that and I hit OK, wish there was an apply in schedules. Base level, these have different top levels. Okay, let me go back to sorting and grouping, and let me get rid of the top level. Say none, group this back down to type, say okay. So once I got rid of that top level, it is saying varies because I've said don't sort these individually. I said sort them by the type, and then I said sort them by the nothing else, whatever I said in there. So you back to that sorting and grouping, 100%, this all comes with how you are grouping it. So if you're seeing varies and you don't want it, you've got to start coming through here and saying, oh, okay, in this case, top level would have done it. I say, okay, now I'm getting it all corrected. But not totally, because here I've now got varies for top offset and length, right? So this is my column, it's the top offset is in there. So if I come back to my sorting and grouping, well, I either need to add top offset or length. I'm going to add length in this case, say, okay. And now just by adding the length, that's going to realize that the lengths are different. Therefore, the top offset should be different. And that's going to eliminate that value. These are the tools, the sorting and grouping tools, the huge tool to me that I don't think enough people take advantage of. That along with the unchecking itemize every instance. Like if I realize that all these columns were broke and these columns technically should have just had a 0 top offset, I can go back to my sorting and grouping. I can sort this by only top offset. I can say none after that and say okay. And then I can come in here. Yeah, these are probably going to be attached. No, sorting and grouping. I only said top offset. None. Why is it still? Oh, because I still have blank line. Say okay. And then I come in here to all of those top offsets and just type in 0. These are probably actually attached. This is probably a bad example. What I wanted to show you is like if all of them were not attached to something, I could just type in 0 and fix all of them at the same time. So you can go through here and quickly sort and group your schedules the way you want to sort them and start tweaking things. So if you're like, oh man, all of my columns that went up to R2 need to go up to R3, I need to move the levels. I don't have to go back into the model and go through and change those levels. I can come back up here and say, ooh, what's that top level? Again, unchecking itemize every instance, say okay, and realize that, ooh, that top level and all the ones that were in R2, I screwed up, that should have went to pyRevit 2. I've just fixed 30 columns all at once. Didn't have to find them in the model, didn't have to find them visually looking for them, literally just came in and changed those in the schedule. So whenever you see that varies, that is based on your sorting and grouping. The other thing about this that's really, really cool also is that sorting and grouping, or the word varies when it came out. That was in 23, I think, or 22.1, one of those. If you don't like the word varies, sorry, it's on formatting. On the formatting tab, where is this? Yeah, display as varies or use project settings. So you can change it, and there's a project setting for this, or you can say display custom text. Jacked up. I can change it from the word varies. I thought that fixed it. Did I miss it? Display custom text. Multiple values just jacked up. Why is it not an update? This should be updating. Click in a different field. Oh, it's parameter specific. That is. Thank you. I knew that. Thank you for typing that in, Sean. And then there's also in the edit type on the schedule. Is it in here? No, there's another place to change it. There's to change it globally. There is a setting to change it globally too. If you don't like varies in brackets, you can change it globally and have a global setting when you get in there. But again, on that formatting tab, yeah, I did it for type. Now it says jacked up. You'd have to do it for each one of those individually, or you can say use project settings and you can set up a project setting for all of them to change. So you can do that as well. So that's how, just your sorting and grouping when you start looking at it. No, if the schedule is over 10 fields, you are limited by so yes, when you're in the sorting and grouping, I've complained about this for years. I hate the fact that we can only sort and group by 4. If you have like try to come up with these, like I'm still getting varies on those. If that's the case, then all you can do is itemize every instance or do multiple schedules where you're filtering out all the level 1 columns versus the level 2 columns or whatever values you're looking for, and then just place multiple schedules on the sheet. Only one has to have the title. You can put the other ones below it without a title, but yeah, you only have the 4, and it's really, 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 really frustrating. They gave us more filters at one point in time because originally I think we only had 3 filters or 4 filters. So they did add some filtering for us, but I wish we'd get more on the sorting and grouping as well. So unfortunately, nope, that's just how it is. Yeah, and then in the project, I forget where it is. Somewhere in the project, additional settings, under annotations, multiple values. Yeah, it's close. So the multiple values indication, the default template says varies, or you could say display custom text, different. And now they're all different. So hopefully that answers the question. I think I got to all the questions. We are at 10 minutes past. Wow, that went really fast. We are 10 minutes past, so I appreciate everybody for showing up and spending your time with Revit Radio. Please feel free to share this with your friends, families, enemies, whoever you need to, other people who need to kill billable time and not be productive. Feel free to share it with everybody. Really appreciate it. And this will be recorded and put on my YouTube channel. Again, you can just Google the Revit Geek on YouTube. You should be able to find me. And other than that, thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see you next month.